All right, everybody. As we get started this morning, if we could just take a moment of silence. I'll invite you to take a deep breath in and deep breath out. And I'll invite you to let your mind settle. Any worries that you have, any shame that you bear, I invite you to put that on a table in your own mind, set it down for one moment, and allow yourself to be fully present right here, right now. So we take one final breath in and one breath out. Amen. Y'all, we're coming up on 2 years, almost to the day, since I guest preached here in 2020 and decided to apply for the associate pastor position because I had so much fun. So it's been a great 2 years. Thank you. Oh, I wasn't asking for applause. My gosh. Okay. But I have a really great opportunity in these next 3 weeks, since Pastor Robin's going on vacation, to spend a little bit of time on one subject over 3 weeks. And if I had to say what the theme of this series will be over the next 3 weeks, we'll be in the Gospel of Luke for all 3 gospel readings. And the takeaway question that I'd like for us to be able to answer at the end is, what are Jesus' priorities? The 3 stories that we'll be looking at are the story of Mary and Martha, which you know probably from Sunday school as a kid. Next week, we'll be looking at the Lord's Prayer and Jesus' call to the disciples in the Gospel of Luke to ask, seek, and knock. And last, we'll be looking at one of my favorite stories, which in the Gospel of Luke is often known as the rich fool. It's a story of a man who went up to Jesus and asked how he could be his disciple. Jesus told him to sell all his stuff and give it to the poor, and the guy said, no thanks. So that's why there wasn't 13 disciples, I guess. But the thing that connects these 3 stories, and you might even say the story that comes right before it, which is the story of the Good Samaritan in Luke 10, are what is it that Jesus says are important, truly important in our lives? What are the things that we should pay the most attention to? All of us have a million things that are pulling us in a million different directions. We're all the main character of our own story. And everything has an emotional weight to it. Everything from how we raise our kids, how we'll have our career, who we'll make a life with as a partner, how we look physically, how much money we have in the bank. All these things pull us in different directions. And all those different ways of prioritizing your life sometimes feel contradictory. You say, I want to be a good person, but I also want to be able to relax on the weekends without wondering if I'm a good person. I want to raise kids who are well-behaved and mature and polite, but also I don't want to be a helicopter parent, right? We all get pulled in a million directions. So what is it that Jesus says is worthy of our attention? Human beings have evolved to become the ultimate social creatures. We recognize, and we have recognized throughout history, the need to make rules to organize ourselves. Rules that we use to decide how we act in different social situations. And these rules, which we have made, they create a predictable environment or a predictable set of actions that human beings will play out. But here's the thing about these rules. Even the ones that are good are completely made up. Every one of them. Even the ones that keep us safe, like look both ways before you cross the road. Somebody made that up one day, thankfully. Stop, drop, and roll. Somebody had to think of that. Somebody had to make it up. But for all these great rules that we have that keep us safe and predictable and in order, there's a million more rules that we follow without even realizing that we've subscribed to these rules at all. A great example of this came when my wife and I were on vacation in Barcelona. We were with her 2 siblings. All 3 of them speak Spanish beautifully. I was the worst Spanish speaker of the bunch. It's always good to be the dumbest person in the room. It's humbling, right? And this episode I'm going to title The Picasso Debacle. Barcelona has the Picasso Museum. And if you don't know about Pablo Picasso, yes, you do. I'm just Googling later. And we were walking through the Picasso Museum where Picasso spent his early life. And I felt like such a Texan. I was going through and I was like, wow, that Picasso can really paint. But you can only see so many representations geometrically of a female form before you start to get a little bored. And Kendra's brother was the first of us to go. He needed to go to the bathroom. So Kendra and Robbie went to go look for a bathroom. And my sister-in-law, Joy, and I were stuck in the middle of the Picasso exhibit waiting for them. And here's the thing. When you've been on a train or a bus or a plane, you get tired. You know, it's a hot day. Even though you're surrounded by gorgeous art, you suddenly have this urge to sit down. And so Joy, without really even thinking about it, she sat down crisscross applesauce. We were out of the way. And an attendant came up and said, "Excuse me, ma'am, you can't sit here." Why not? Why not? Because it's not how you behave in a museum, right? So she stood up. "Oh, I'm sorry. 5 minutes later, we're still waiting for them in the bathroom. Apparently, this is like the farthest bathroom that could possibly be away. And Joy puts her foot against the wall and kind of leans like this. The attendant comes up. Ma'am, please. You can't put your feet on the wall." Why? Like, what does it matter, right? This lady, like, nobody's stealing anything. We're not in the middle of a heist. Leave us alone, basically. But, oh, sorry. I wiped the wall off so that her foot dust was off of it. Can't sit down, can't lean against the wall. Ironically, once Robbie and Kendra came back from the bathroom, we continued our way through the exhibit. We take a right where you're supposed to, as they are very clearly telling us to go, and what's sitting right there? A bench. This whole time we were suffering. You're not allowed to sit on the floor, you're not allowed to lean against the wall, but you were allowed to sit on the bench. We just didn't know it was there. And it was right around the corner. And I wondered if the lady might have told us this and saved us a little bit of trouble. Those are some rules that you're expected to follow in a museum. Don't sit down, don't lean against the wall, don't touch the art. What are some other museum rules? Shout it out, don't be shy. Be quiet, hold silence. One of the churches we went to said, "Please make silence." All right, what an interesting rule that is. What are some other rules about the museum? What? No food, no drinks, no flash photography. We all know them, right? But these rules are not limited to just the museum. Okay, and I have a little illustration. Can I have a volunteer? Somebody who can be reached by the microphone? Okay. So I have a picture here. Could you, without reading the text on the back, could you show my cheat sheet? Can you show the congregation this picture? Okay, everybody look at it. If you can't see it perfectly, that's okay. Now, if you could, go ahead and describe what you see in this picture here.
It's a little girl holding a hat. She's wearing a really cute dress, and the hat's got some feathers on it. She's got some nice shoes and socks. She looks like long hair. She looks like she might be blonde or light brown hair. The dress is all white.
How old do you think they are?
She looks like she's about 3 or 4.
And if you had to guess, what year do you think this picture was taken?
Oh, it's got to be 1700s, 1800s maybe?
1900s, 20th century.
Oh, okay.
Okay, let's give a round of applause for sermon participation. Take one more look at the picture. This is not a little girl. This is FDR, also known as Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Fifth cousin of famous manly man Teddy Roosevelt. And when this picture was taken, FDR was president during World War II, so you can guess this picture was at the turn of the 20th century. At the turn of the 20th century, this is how little boys dressed. They wore dresses, they wore shiny shoes, they had long combed hair. that dress might have been pink, right? The things that we associate with gender are so often completely constructed. And we may not even realize it. So much so that now, if a little boy walked like this into a classroom in Texas or Florida, I think they would have CPS called on them, right? It'd be called child abuse. It'd be called grooming. It'd be called all kinds of things. Styles change. Structures change. Rules change. And they change when we realize that the rules are all made up in the first place. A couple other examples of this I see coming from Texas. There's lots of cultural differences. The most frustrating cultural difference is that in Texas, we are taught that the nose of your car is to be behind a stop sign when you come up to a stop sign. Here, every time that I'm driving past that intersection, somebody rolls through that stop sign to where the stop sign is like parallel to their shoulder, half their nose is sticking out into the... I always think they're going to pull out in front of me. Always. Another example, in Massachusetts, if there's a major thoroughfare, and then there's there's a street going both directions, and there's somebody who can turn left across oncoming traffic. In Texas, everybody has to wait for the people in line before they can turn. In Worcester, for some reason, the first person in line in the opposing traffic, even though they don't have right of way, one person, the first person in line, shoots the gap, and they go in front of oncoming traffic, and everyone else has to wait. This boggled me so much that I Googled it, and it's called the Worcester left. It's infamous. Rules are contrived. They're made up. One of my favorites, which is something I run into a lot, is a bald person who wears a hat inside and out all year round. Some people still get really bent out of shape if you wear a hat in church. I've found out on several occasions. Why? The oldest tradition, from the Judeo-Christian tradition, you always covered your head when you went into a church. For some reason, it changed at some point. What is it about me wearing a hat that makes it bad in church but good outdoors? Who knows? It's a made-up rule. More made-up rules include governments, economies, the notion of currency. All of these things require us all to agree to pretend that they actually exist when they don't. Our gospel lesson today in the Gospel of Luke. Jesus enters into a town, says a certain village, doesn't say where. And he's met by a woman named Martha who welcomes him into her home. And here's the thing. Martha, she took her job as host very seriously. And when you have a rabbi visiting your house and in that period of time, in that part of the world, that meant that you made sure the house was running right, you made sure everybody was fed, you made sure everybody was clean. And Martha is storming around the kitchen. I know it's the kitchen because it says that she comes up to yell at her sister, passive-aggressively. It says that she comes up where the kitchen was, down from where the kitchen was, up into where the sitting area would have been. And who's sitting there at Jesus' feet? Her no-good, lazy sister, Miriam. And so, very indirectly, she says to Jesus, she goes, "Lord!" Exclamation point. "Would you tell my sister that I am working very hard?" She said, "Is it not concerning to you that I'm doing all the work and my sister, Miriam, just sitting here at your feet?" That's where things get interesting. In most English translations, it says, "Martha, Martha, there's only one thing that's important." That's what it says in most English translations. But in Greek, it doesn't say that. It says this. It says, "Oligon de estin Kerzee." I look at that and I say, holigon. That doesn't mean one. Enos is one. In a lot of translations, they translate it as though it's Enos. Instead, the word is oligon. I looked it up. It's not a word that I recognized. Apparently, it doesn't occur in the Bible very often, which is why I don't recognize it and never memorized it. And it's used in a couple other places. Paul uses oligon once, and he says, I write to you briefly about a few things. So oligon, in that sense, is translated as brief. In other places, it says, Jesus says, I have trusted you with a few things, and you've done well, so I'll trust you with many things. So brief, few. It's used simply to mean small, little, but it's never used to mean one. And so I think that a better translation of this is this. Jesus' response to Miriam is to Martha, you're busying yourself with many things, but very few things are important. And Miriam has chosen the best portion of those few good things, and that won't be taken away from her. Miriam is sitting at Jesus' feet, listening to the words of the rabbi, the Messiah. She recognizes his importance and the importance of his words. This being Jesus, who was the Word of God that spoke creation into being. All that other stuff isn't important right now. What's important is sitting at the feet of the Master. Jesus loved breaking rules, and he loved breaking rules on purpose to show how silly they were. Just off the top of my head, there's a few examples here. In Luke 11, which is right around this verse, Jesus gets questioned by the Pharisees, why don't you and your disciples wash your hands the way you're supposed to? And Jesus says, you're concerned with washing the outside of the cup, but the inside remains dirty. Says you wash your hands, but you don't care about the poor. You wash your hands, but you don't seek justice. He says those things aren't important. What's important is justice, truth, and mercy. Jesus gets into it again with his disciples for plucking grain on the Sabbath. And when the church officials ask him why, he says, because I was hungry. And he said, King David himself, worked on the Sabbath when he and his soldiers were famished. He sat next to a Samaritan woman at a well. He talked to a woman, which you weren't supposed to do. He talked to a Samaritan, which you weren't supposed to do. Later on, when a woman is caught in adultery, the woman is brought before Jesus, and the men who are there say, by our laws, according to our rules, she's supposed to be stoned to death. What do you say? And what does he say back? He who's without sin cast the first stone. Neither do I condemn you. It's almost as if Jesus realized that there is cosmic significance that is essential to us, that is important existentially, and then there are the things that we create, thinking someone else is succeeding, not me. You're comparing yourself to others on social media. You're comparing yourself to your friends. You're worried about if your kids are successful. You're worried about if you're successful. You're worried about how you look. You're worried about if you're attractive or not. All of these things are not cosmically significant. Everybody get out your hand like this, if you don't mind. And just kind of hold it up like this, and look at your own index finger, okay? Now imagine with your arm fully extended that there's a grain of sand on the tip of your finger. And look up at the sky and make a small imaginary square where that grain of sand would be. You can keep your hand up if you want, or you can just move to your brains now. Recently, we launched the most powerful telescope that human beings have ever made. It was a seemingly impossible task that you can look up on Wikipedia. It's incredible. It's an incredible story in itself. But the very first image that they chose to share from the James Webb Space Telescope is a section of the sky so small that if you held out your hand and looked at the end of your index finger and put a grain of sand at the end, that would be how big the square of sky that they pointed this telescope at is. And in it are dozens and dozens of galaxies. Imagine if the whole sky was opened up. how many galaxies we would see that there are in the cosmos. And among those galaxies, there's 100 billion stars each. And each of those stars probably has a planet. So there's 100 billion planets on every speck of light that you see in this picture. It's enough to blow your mind. And when we're met with our own cosmic tininess, it's easy for us to slip into the question, what is it all for? What does it matter? I'm a small being on an Earth, which is a rock that's floating around a sun that's one of 100 billion suns in one galaxy among 100 billion galaxies, 2 trillion galaxies, excuse me, each with 100 billion stars, each with planets. What does it all matter? It's easy to feel insignificant in the face of our growing understanding of the size of the universe. But for me, instead of slipping into nihilism, which says that nothing matters, that nothing has a purpose, what this can do is this can create a positive nihilism. There is nothing that I can do, no mistake that I can make, no misstep, no intentionally ugly thing that I could do that would upset that cosmic order. Nothing. We walk around convinced that the earth is on our shoulders. It's not. And the earth ain't even it. It's almost like we're little kids and we're on a long walk, call it a hike. We begin to complain. We're looking down at our feet. And I feel like God sometimes is the adult who's walking with us saying, do you realize where you are? Look up. And when we do, we're bathed in this enormous cosmic landscape that can give us the freedom of being small. Positive nihilism says that there is a point. There are things that matter, like love, and connection, kindness, self-sacrifice. All these things are embodied in the person of Christ, who invites us to zoom out from our very narrow perspective and recognize that we are part of something bigger than any generation of human beings before us ever could have conceptualized. We, whether we realize it or not, have constant opportunities to bask in the light of God, to stand in God's presence, and by receiving the goodness of God's presence, that grace that we receive, we can take on some of the qualities of that good thing. An ember that is pushed into the heart of a flame begins to glow red and give off heat, takes on the qualities of the fire. In the same way, if we nudge ourselves as close as we can to that source of our light, that secret flame that we experience because of what Jesus showed us, we too begin to take on the qualities of God. So what's the point? It's a great question. The point is that any point that we've ever made up is made up. All the things that we judge ourselves against are contrived. And with that comes the freedom. All that we have to do is recognize that we are already sitting at the feet of the Master. All that we have to do is recognize the truth of that. Some of us are going to be like Mary, and here's the deal. If you're like Mary in this moment and someone else is like Martha, they're going to be mad. Oh, you're breaking the rules. Why are you dressed that way? Why do you want me to call you she when I've always called you he? Why are you upsetting your father? Your grandma would be so upset if she could see you today. All of these rules, they don't matter. And when we're storming around the kitchen of life like Martha, Jesus says, Martha, Martha, Zach, Zach. Here you've convinced yourself that everything that you do is extremely important, that the earth is on your shoulders, but it's not. Look up. Zoom out. Look where you are. We are in a sanctuary filled with breeze and trees with leaves that have so many more cells inside of them than you have in your entire body. We're connected through one line of evolution with every living thing, every bug, every tree, every vine, every dog that bites you, every lion that hunts you. We're a part of that. And when we're storming around, missing the forest for the trees, getting ourselves in a fluster, it's almost like Jesus comes to us and says, Martha, Martha, Zach, Zach, Robin, Robin, Kate, Kate. There's only a few important things. And Miriam, she chose the best portion of those few things, which is to sit at the foot of the Master. Amen.